If you think you have seen everything that can go wrong for a sitting American president on the world stage, if you think nothing can surprise you anymore about how far the relationship between the United States and its closest allies has deteriorated, then buckle up right now, because what just happened this morning is something that has never happened in the entire 77-year history of the NATO alliance, something that left the White House scrambling for an explanation, something that Donald Trump himself admitted in front of cameras at the White House with a look on his face that told you everything you need to know about where American foreign policy stands today. Donald Trump asked 7 countries to send warships to the Strait of Hormuz, and every single one of them said no. Not maybe. Not we need more time. Not let us consult our parliaments. No. 7 countries, some of them America's oldest and closest allies, countries that have fought beside American soldiers in every major conflict since World War II, looked at the most powerful president in the world making a direct military request and said no. And the reason they said no, the reason that should concern every single American watching this right now, is not complicated, and it is not about geography or military capacity or legal frameworks. It is about something much simpler and much more damaging to America's standing in the world. They said no because they do not trust him. And before we go any deeper into exactly what happened, who said what, why it matters for your gas bill, your grocery prices, and the future of the alliance that has kept the peace in the Western world for 8 decades, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the bell, because this story is developing by the hour, and what we are watching unfold in real time is the most significant collapse of American diplomatic credibility since the Iraq War, and you do not want to miss a single update. So let us go back to the beginning, because the full story is far more dramatic than the headline, and you need every piece of it to understand why today is different from every other moment in this war. On February 28th, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, a coordinated military campaign against Iran, targeting missile facilities, naval installations, and command infrastructure across the country. And within days, Iran responded by doing exactly what every military analyst, every intelligence assessment, and every energy market specialist had warned it would do if attacked. It began closing the Strait of Hormuz, the 21 nautical mile-wide choke point between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, through which 1/5 of all the world's traded oil normally passes every single day. 1,000 oil tankers are currently stranded and unable to pass through the strait, according to data from the International Maritime Organization, the UN body that monitors global shipping, and at least 10 vessels have been hit, targeted, or have reported attacks since the war began, according to UK Maritime Trade Operations, which tracks incidents in real time, and the result has been an oil price shock that has pushed Brent crude to $104.84 per barrel today, the highest level since July 2022, and pushed American gas prices to their highest point since October 2023, with diesel approaching $5 a gallon nationally. This is the context in which Trump made his demand. On Saturday, Trump posted on Truth Social saying he hoped China, France, Japan, South Korea, the United Kingdom, and others would send ships to the area so that the Hormuz Strait would no longer be a threat, describing Iran as a nation that has been totally decapitated. And then, on Sunday, speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One as he flew back to Washington from Florida, he said he had demanded about 7 countries send warships to keep the strait open, claiming it is their territory, their problem, their oil, and that the United States does not really need the strait because of its own domestic energy production. And then on Sunday night, in an interview with the Financial Times, Trump escalated his language to a direct threat, saying that the failure of allies to help would be very bad for the future of NATO. And on Monday morning at the White House, he went further, telling reporters that some are countries that we have helped for many, many years. We have protected them from horrible outside sources, and they were not that enthusiastic, and that the level of enthusiasm matters to him. He did not name any country that had committed to sending ships. He claimed some were already on the way. He said he would provide a list at a future date. No list has been provided. No country has publicly announced the deployment of a single warship. Here is the response from each country one by one, because the specificity of these rejections is the real story. Germany. Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said directly to ARD television, "This is not our war. We did not start it. The Americans chose this path together with the Israelis. Will we soon be an active part of this conflict? No." France. Minister of the Armed Forces Catherine Vautrin stated her preference for a diplomatic initiative in resolving the situation. President Macron said France is working on an international escort mission, but only when circumstances permit. when the fighting has subsided, which means not now, not while American and Israeli strikes are ongoing. Britain. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who has given the United States only limited access to British military bases for what he has described as defensive operations only, told reporters Monday that the strait must be reopened, but that this is not a simple task, that Britain will not be drawn into the wider war, and that he is working with allies on a plan that must be collective and viable. He did not commit a single ship, and most Britons oppose the war, according to every poll taken since it began. Japan. Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi told Parliament directly that Japan has not made any decisions whatsoever about dispatching escort ships, adding that Japanese law strictly limits overseas military deployments and that operations in the Strait of Hormuz might not pass legal muster under those restrictions. South Korea. The Foreign Ministry said it takes note of Trump's call and will closely coordinate and carefully review the situation, which is diplomatic language for we are not saying yes and we are not saying no, and we hope this goes away before we have to decide. China. The Foreign Ministry spokesperson did not even directly acknowledge whether China had received a request from the United States, instead calling on all parties to immediately cease military actions, a direct contradiction of the American position that the war was necessary and justified. And Chinese analyst Barbara Slavin, distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center, told Al Jazeera directly that she highly doubts China will offer naval forces, noting that Iranian oil is flowing to China quite nicely because Iran has said the strait is open to all countries except the United States and its allies. That last point deserves a moment to sit with, because it is one of the most extraordinary facts of this entire conflict. Iran has kept the strait open for China while closing it to American allies, which means China has absolutely no economic incentive to help the United States reopen a waterway that is already open to Chinese ships. And yet Trump is threatening to cancel his upcoming summit with Xi Jinping unless Beijing helps, which is the diplomatic equivalent of asking someone to fix a problem that is not affecting them and threatening to cancel a meeting they also want to have if they refuse. Drop a comment below right now and tell me whether you think any country is actually going to send warships to this strait, because I want to know what you think is really happening here, whether this is a negotiating tactic or whether the United States is genuinely alone in this conflict in a way that has real consequences for how the war ends. Now, here is the part that the White House does not want Americans to focus on, the part that Edward Fishman, a director at the Council on Foreign Relations, said out loud on CNBC this morning, and that nobody in the administration has adequately answered. The Trump administration did not consult allies in Europe or Asia before launching military action against Iran. Not a phone call, not a briefing, not a classified intelligence sharing session, not a working group, nothing. The United States and Israel coordinated Operation Epic Fury bilaterally and informed allied governments after the strikes had already begun, and those governments, the same governments that are now being threatened with a very bad future for NATO if they do not send ships, found out about the war the same way their citizens did, by watching the news. Fishman put it plainly: those allies are much more dependent on oil imports from the Gulf than the United States is, raising questions about whether they would expect concessions from Washington in return for assistance. And he added the observation that is the core of the entire diplomatic failure: if the tables were turned, Trump would likely demand something in return for assistance. That is the world these countries are operating in right now, a world where the United States launched a war that directly threatened the oil supply of its closest allies without consulting them, then demanded they send their military assets to clean up the consequences, and then threatened their future in the alliance when they declined. And every foreign minister in Europe and Asia is doing the same calculation this morning, which is that helping Trump now costs them politically at home, commits them to a war their populations oppose, and earns them nothing in return from an administration that has spent the last year hitting them with tariffs and calling their prime ministers governors. The Iran war is entering its third week, and the coalition that Trump promised would be broad and decisive has produced 0 publicly committed warships from 0 countries as of this moment. The price of oil is at $104.84 a barrel today. Americans are paying the highest gas prices since October 2023. Diesel is approaching $5 a gallon. The IEA has announced the largest emergency reserve release in history at nearly 412 million barrels, just to prevent prices from going even higher, and 1,000 tankers are sitting stranded in the Persian Gulf, unable to move, while the president threatens allies who will not help and claims that some are already on the way, without providing a single name or a single date. Here's what this means for you as an American, and why this is not just a foreign policy story, but a story about your wallet and your daily life. The Strait of Hormuz carries 1/5 of all globally traded oil every day, and every day that it remains closed or restricted, the price of energy in the United States climbs, because even though America is now a net energy exporter, American oil prices are set on global markets, which means that when global supply is disrupted, American consumers pay more at the pump, regardless of how much oil is being pumped out of Texas and North Dakota. Every $10 increase in the price of a barrel of oil translates to approximately 24 cents per gallon at the pump, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration's own methodology, and oil has increased by more than $40 per barrel since Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th, which is a back-of-envelope calculation that tells you how much of your current gas bill is a direct result of a war that was launched without consulting a single allied government and is now being sustained without the support of a single allied navy. Trump said Sunday that the United States does not really need the Strait of Hormuz because of its own oil production. But the former White House energy advisor, Bob McNally, said something this weekend that cuts through that claim entirely. He said there are no policies Donald Trump can implement to deal with skyrocketing energy prices if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. None. Not domestic drilling, not strategic reserve releases, not any executive order that currently exists, because the strait is a global choke point and its closure affects global prices regardless of where any individual country's oil comes from. 7 countries were asked to send warships, and every single one said no. And the president is now threatening the future of the alliance that won the Cold War because the countries he insulted with tariffs, ignored in the planning of a war, and now needs are declining to show enthusiasm for a conflict they did not agree to and did not start, Trump said at the White House today. We will remember. And he said it about the countries that have been America's closest partners for 80 years. France, Germany, Britain, Japan, South Korea. The countries that rebuilt Europe after World War II with American help. The countries that sent troops to Afghanistan and Iraq. The countries whose security the United States has guaranteed for 8 decades. We will remember. If this video told you something about what is really happening in the world right now that the mainstream coverage is not putting together for you, do me a favor and share it with someone who deserves to know the full story. Because what is unfolding today in the Strait of Hormuz and in the capitals of Europe and Asia is not just a diplomatic setback. It is the moment the world is deciding whether to keep trusting American leadership. And the answer coming back from 7 countries this morning was the same answer, and it was not yes. We will be right here covering every development as it happens. Stay tuned and stay informed.